"Grandma, why is there a spider on our tree?" The little girl pointed at the small silver ornament tucked between the branches, its thread-thin legs catching the light from the fireplace, and waited the way children do when they already suspect the answer is going to be worth staying up a little later for. Her grandmother set down her knitting and smiled the particular smile that always came right before a story. "Come here," she said, patting the space beside her on the old armchair. "That spider has been on this family's tree for longer than you've been alive, and longer than I've been alive too. Let me tell you why it's there. It began," she said, "in a small village tucked somewhere between Germany and Ukraine, in the kind of winter where the snow piled higher than the fences and smoke curled from every chimney, but one seemed to burn a little less brightly than the rest. In a modest wooden cottage at the edge of that village lived a widow and her 3 children. Their home held more love than most houses twice its size, but it held very little else. The widow worked with her hands from sunrise until well past dark, and still, some months, there was barely enough left over for bread, let alone anything resembling the festive luxuries that filled the market square each December. As the season crept closer, the whole village seemed to hum with anticipation. Wreaths appeared on doors. Children traded stories about what St. Nicholas might leave beneath their trees. And in the widow's cottage, that same excitement lived in her children's eyes too. They had seen the grand trees in the square, strung with ribbon and candlelight, and though they never said it aloud, she could tell exactly what they were hoping for. The widow lay awake more than one night that December, turning over in her mind every possible way to give her children something to be proud of, and coming up, again and again, with almost nothing. Still, she refused to let the season pass without at least trying. A few days before Christmas, she walked out to the edge of the forest and returned with a tree. Small, a little crooked, sparse enough that you could see clean through its branches to the wall behind it. It wasn't the tree from the market square, but it was a tree, and that alone made her children's faces light up in a way that made the whole walk through the cold feel worth it. Together, that evening, the family decorated it with whatever they could find in the house. A length of faded ribbon pulled from an old dress, paper chains looped together by small, careful fingers, and a handful of candle stubs saved from better days, standing crookedly along the thinner branches. It wasn't grand by any measure, but as the 3 children stepped back to admire their work, none of them seemed to notice what it lacked. To them, in that moment, it was already beautiful. What the widow never knew was that her family wasn't the only one in that cottage paying close attention to the little tree. High in the corners of the room, tucked into cracks in the old wooden beams, lived a family of spiders who had made that cottage their home for longer than anyone could say. All season, they had watched the children's excitement build, day by day, the way you'd watch a candle slowly catching flame. And on Christmas Eve, as the widow swept the floor for the last time that year, the spiders did what they always did when company was near. They scurried up into the shadows of the highest corners, careful not to be seen, and waited for the house to fall quiet. It didn't take long. Exhausted from a full day's work, and heavy with the same worry that had followed her for weeks, the widow finally lay down, whispering a quiet apology to no one in particular for not being able to give her children more. Within minutes, the cottage had gone still, save for 8 small legs creeping carefully down from the rafters. "It started," Grandma always said, with the youngest spider. As the clock somewhere in the village struck midnight, it lowered itself down to the lowest branch of the little tree and began, thread by careful thread, to spin. Watching their youngest work, the rest of the spider family couldn't help but follow. First one, then another, until every member of that small, quiet household was weaving silk across the branches, working through the night with a patience no human hands could have matched. By the time the first hint of grey touched the horizon, the entire tree stood wrapped in an intricate blanket of webs, each strand catching the moonlight through the window and scattering it across the room like something out of a dream nobody in that cottage had dared to have. It was in that stillness that Santa Claus arrived. He stopped in the doorway for a long moment, taking in a Christmas tree unlike any he'd delivered gifts beneath in all his years of traveling from house to house, not glittering with polished ornaments, not gleaming with ribbon, wrapped entirely and delicately in spider silk. For a moment, he simply stood there, and then, understanding exactly what he was looking at, a family with almost nothing, and creatures with even less, both giving the only thing they had left to give, something in his expression softened. He raised one hand, and with the smallest flick of his wrist, he touched the tree with a quiet kind of magic, turning every silvery strand of web into shimmering ribbons of silver and gold. On Christmas morning, the widow woke to the sound of her children's voices rising in disbelief from the front room. She hurried out to find her small, crooked tree transformed, glowing under the morning light, draped in tinsel that seemed to catch fire with every beam of sun through the window. Her children stood frozen in wonder, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the widow felt her worry lift completely, replaced by something warm enough to fill the whole cottage. It became, from that morning on, the story the family told every year, of the small spider that dared to give first, and the family that followed, and the kindness a stranger recognized in the dark. And that, Grandma said, gently touching the little silver spider hanging just above the girl's reach, is why families all over still hang one of these every Christmas. Not because spiders bring luck, but because someone small, with almost nothing to offer, chose to give it anyway, and it turned out to be exactly enough. The little girl studied the ornament a while longer in the firelight, then leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. If this old story warmed you the way it's warmed families for generations, stay a little longer, subscribe, and tell us in the comments if your family has a Christmas legend of its own worth telling.